Colorado's Republican governor, Ivey, has decided to fire or compel the resignation of the top education official who apparently endorsed a book that Governor Ivey didn't like. A lot of right-wingers get their feelings hurt over books these days, and this is definitely a good example of that. So Barbara Cooper, who was the head of the Alabama Department of Early Education, was allegedly compelled to resign after Ivey basically shared that she had an issue with a book that was being promoted. So Ivey's spokesperson identified the book as the National Association for the Education of Young Children Developmentally Appropriate Practice Book, 4th edition, which does not have a clunky title at all. Just rolls right off the tongue. But nonetheless, this isn't meant to be used as curriculum for early education. This is just meant to be used as a guide for educators. So the text in question is a widely used resource guide for early childhood educators that informs teachers that the early education system is not immune from the forces of systemic and institutional racism embedded in the history and development of the United States. I'm gonna pause for reaction because I'm curious, Cenk, what you think of the guide for the educators.
So, first of all, I'm just gonna double down on what Anna said. It's not going to the kids. So you gotta think, can grown-up teachers handle that kind of information and then make their own judgment call on how to present that within the context of their teaching? And Ivey and other Republican legislators or throughout the country are saying, no, we don't trust the teachers. We don't think that they could, the idea that institutional racism might exist, that should not even enter the heads of the educators. They should not take that into account. They should assume there's no racism. Well, first of all, that's just not true. And then second of all, if you treat your teachers like they're little children, that's not gonna be helpful in the process. And so look at what they're saying. Early education system is not immune from the force of systemic and institutional racism. Well, of course that could be true. There are plenty of instances where you have folks that treat people differently, whether it's based on race, whether it's, by the way, a lot of times based on class, right? So are we not allowed to talk about any of that because it offends people's feelings?
And it's not like this is being talked about in the context of preschools, right? This is just to inform the educators about possible biases and possible issues that could sway the way they handle teaching. Okay,
yeah.
or certain, like, I'll give you an example, right? So a lot of schools have resource officers now. And if you look at the data pertaining to who gets disciplined by the resource officers, there seems to be a significant difference in, a disproportionate amount of students of color end up getting punished by the resource officers. Like, that is an example. That's not meant to be taught to the preschoolers, it's just something for the educators to keep in mind, because sometimes we have these biases that we might not be aware of. They might be unconscious biases. So I'm guessing that's part of what this
100%
is about. Okay, but Governor Ivey, not a fan of this. And so the governor's office in a press release cited 2 examples from the book, one discussing white privilege and that the United States is built on systemic and structural racism, and another that Ivey's office claimed teaches LGBTQ plus inclusion to 4-year-olds. Those sections discuss combating bias and making sure that all children feel welcome. The section on structural racism says preschool is one place where children begin to see how they are represented in society, and that the classroom should be a place of affirmation and healing.
Well, that does sound dangerous. Affirmation and healing. Yeah. Ooh, you wouldn't want that for the kids.
Yeah.
Okay, so I read the part where they mentioned the LGBTQ plus inclusion. It wasn't directed at 4-year-olds, it was directed at teachers, and all it said was, remember, they also exist. Wow, I didn't know they were that radical. Like, it's just stating that they exist as human beings, and they're saying, hey, keep in mind, some of your students are not necessarily your demographic, right? They might be of a different race, they might be disadvantaged economically, they might be LGBTQIA plus, etc. Well, that's just a fact, that's true. Some of the students might be that way. And so you don't want them to know that? Like, this is just absurd, guys.
So let's go to what the governor finally did. So the governor's office said Ivey first asked Cooper to send a memo to disavow this book and to immediately discontinue its use. Ivey's office did not say how Cooper responded, but that the governor made the decision to replace Cooper and accepted her resignation. So it sounds like she was compelled to resign.
100%, which by the way is literal political correctness.
Yeah.
She was factually correct about structural racism and the fact that LGBTQ people exist, right? But she was not politically correct. The politically correct position is, no, in schools we are to pretend that they do not exist and that there is no structural racism. So Republicans love political correctness. So look, guys, I mean, needless to say one last thing here. So if Republicans just debated, was our country only founded to perpetuate racism? They might actually win that issue in a debate in the country, whether you agree or disagree with that, but they never stick to like the most extreme position. They then say, no, not only was the country not founded purely on racism, there was no structural racism. Oh, but come on, guys. You slavery, lynchings, Jim Crow. There was no structural racism in America. How could you possibly claim that? Well, then you're just saying, it makes me uncomfortable. So I don't want you to teach things that are true, that are not debatable. I know that they are true. I don't want you telling kids that because they just want to replace facts with propaganda. And that's what they're doing it now because they're desperate. Younger voters are massively progressive and they're trying to figure out how to stem that tide by doing very literal propaganda in the schools.
Also, 55% of Republicans, according to a poll that recently came out, say that fighting woke ideology in schools and businesses is more important than protecting entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare, what have you.
Guys,
so it's political too. Let's keep it real.
Of course, that's the whole point of it. So it's not just that Kate Ivey is racist. I don't know what her inclinations are, and I don't care. She thinks this is going to appeal to my base. I'm in Alabama, and the Democrats have no chance of winning. All I have to do is secure the most extreme part of my base, and I'm going to win. And that number is very clear. It's Rebellion PAC, which I founded, is about to run a poll that asks a very similar question. Because I was wondering, do the Republicans care more about owning the libs or actual government programs that directly help them? And that is the tip of the iceberg in the questions we're gonna ask. But in that tip, you see, no, they would rather lose money, they would rather live demonstrably worse lives as long as they can own the libs and attack the other side.
And this is a Wall Street Journal poll. Let me give you one other detail that we've learned from this one poll. This is graphic 8. 27% of Republican voters say protecting Social Security and Medicare benefits from cuts is more important to them. So again, 55% of Republican voters, the majority of Republican voters, according to this Wall Street Journal poll, believe that pursuing anti-woke policy is more important than protecting these social spending programs from cuts.
Now I'm going to say something that makes people uncomfortable, but the Republican politicians are responding to those Republican voters, especially in the red states.
In this case, they are, yeah.
And the Republican voters say, bash the other side. That's almost the only thing we want. And so Governor Ivey's giving them what they want.
Huge portion of kids in America can't read.
And we're worried about whether they're going to find out that there was racism in American history.
But also, look, at some point I want to do a story on this, and it's got to be a deep dive because there's a lot to it. But I'm so happy I didn't fall into this cohort that because in the 90s when I was going to school, grade school, they moved away from phonics. How stupid was that? And it ended up being a disaster, a complete and utter disaster. But they kept going with it. I luckily was at a school that still believed in phonics and I learned to read that way. Thank God, because English is my second language. But I mean, we've got some deep issues with our education system.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.